Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history. They make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Well, on the subject of rockstar CFOs, we certainly have one today. My guest is Erin Brewer, the CFO of Lyft. There might be a couple of people not familiar with Lyft. And for those people, I'll share that it's a people-first transportation network that blends technology, community, and customer care to make getting around simpler, safer, and more accessible. Erin, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Glad to be here. And like I said, jokingly, everybody knows Lyft, what they do. I'm guessing just about everybody listening will have been a customer of Lyft. But maybe you can share a little bit more about the company and its mission and values?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, Lyft is, at its heart, it's a marketplace. What we do is connect. And it's at the heart of some of our values that we espouse, to connect and serve. So this marketplace connects over 50 million riders on a quarterly basis, with the millions of drivers that come to our platform every quarter. And we get people where they need to go. Rideshare has become such an essential piece of the fabric of the way that people get around, whether it's commuting, healthcare appointments, a night out, whatever the case may be. We get you there. We work really hard to get you there safely. We get you there on time. We offer you a variety of ways that you can travel, from if you have a moment where you need to save a little money on the economy side, all the way up to a luxury ride if you need a lot more space to the airport or just want a great night out on the town. And so it's sort of the physical scale of that network. We operate across the United States and Canada, also Puerto Rico. We've just made an entry into the European market, which is really exciting for us, as we are really, as we say, growing up and growing out.
No, that's fantastic. And you said 50 million, right?
Yeah, 50 million annual riders across US, Canada, Europe.
So that's roughly the population of California. I would say that's a reasonable success story. So good for you. We'll definitely explore that a little bit. But I always like the opportunity to get to know the guests a little bit. And maybe you can tell us where you grew up.
Absolutely. So I am originally from a town called Fort Wayne, Indiana. Both the families on my mother's side and my dad's side are really grounded in sort of the Indiana, Ohio area of the country. So I was born there. But Jack, I always tell people that I grew up in Colorado because my father, with his job, got transferred there when I was in kindergarten. So much of my formative memory is from the years that I spent living with my family as a child in Colorado.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a wonderful childhood. And you probably know this since you're from there, but when you said Fort Wayne, the basketball team now known as the Detroit Pistons were originally the Fort Wayne Pistons. So
I do know that, yes. Yeah. Fort Wayne is actually a big sports town, from semi-pro basketball to a great hockey team that I remember going to occasionally. Big sports area.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when you grew up there, what was your first job?
Oh gosh, well, probably like many people, especially, many women, my first job was babysitting. But my first job where I got an actual real paycheck was I worked at a donut shop. A friend's family owned a donut shop near a lake where we lived, and that was my first job, sort of getting up early, getting the shop ready, selling the donuts, and occasionally eating a few here and there.
I think, had I worked in a donut shop in my youth, I would have been a lot larger than I actually was, I suspect. So, but I'm always remarkable that people who work there are kind of, just normal size, because I don't think I would be. So that was great. So, you're working at a relatively young age.
Yes.
And, I know you probably didn't learn anything explicitly at the donut shop that you're using today, but did that, change you in any way? Did it develop your work ethic, or just some habits you developed or things like that?
Yeah, I would say, a couple of things. I came from a family where both my parents were working parents. My dad was an engineer and later a business executive. My mom was a nurse, later a healthcare executive. So I understood this element of working hard was a worthy thing to do, had a lot of merit. And also then being the daughter of an engineer, sort of the curiosity of, well, how does this actually work? What is the process? What's going on in the back of the shop? What time does everything have to start? How do the ingredients get here? And so I would say in almost every job I've had, it's that curiosity of how do things work? And then I think there's so much value. So many of my early jobs were very public facing. I worked at the donut shop. I worked at a local state park that was in the area, in the campground or at the front gate, and just interacting with people, understanding what was on their mind. Did they have feedback, both good and bad? How do you take that in and share it? How do we make a difference to make the experience better or the donut warmer or whatever the case may be? And so I think it's those in both things that were innate within me, but also the opportunity to learn and the opportunity to understand what it's like to work with really broad sets of people and to be customer facing.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I always, encourage my nieces and nephews. It's like, take a job working with the public. You'll just learn so much about human nature.
No doubt.
Even if you think that you're going to be doing something corporate or whatever, just the ability to deal with people is what makes leaders. So
it does. Yeah. Agreed. Good advice.
Pardon me?
Good uncle advice.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm a pretty good uncle, I have to say. I think I'm the cool uncle in my family. So, which is my sister's a surprise because I was kind of nerdy as a kid, but we'll save that conversation for later. So anyway, you finished high school, and where did you go to school?
I got my undergrad degree at Purdue University, West Lafayette, Indiana. So I went back to the Midwest for that. And then by the time I got my graduate degree, I was out here in California. And so I pursued my MBA at Berkeley.
Okay, so that's a great combination. It doesn't get much better than Berkeley and Purdue in terms of elite schools. So that prepared you well for your career. And you've worked at some of the most respected companies and most well-known companies in the game, Schwab, Atlassian, McKesson, and I'm curious, what those experiences were like, your career journey, maybe things that you learned along the way, and maybe even some key mentors that you had who are still influencing your approach to your job to this day.
Yeah, that's such a great question, great set of questions, because it's intertwined, right? Oftentimes you're intertwining your relationships with mentors with the way that you select a career path. And so maybe I'll start with my time at McKesson. McKesson is a large healthcare technology services distribution company that operates globally, a significant number of employees across the globe. And I came into that organization. It was really my first job where I reported directly to the CFO. I'd always, generally been within broader finance organizations, but it was incredibly formative because I reported to the CFO of the company, a gentleman by the name of Jeff Campbell, who I worked for 7 years at McKesson. He later went on to become the CFO at American Express, is now retired, but was and continues to be just an incredible mentor of mine. And I think there were a number of qualities that, I admired at the time, continue to admire, and also try to emulate. The steadiness of leadership. I think often in the CFO chair, you're dealing with, many different things, risks, opportunities. How do you make decisions in ambiguous situations? And the steadiness of leadership was always something that I admired. I think that's really critical at the top of an organization to be steady, certainly as a CFO, to take in all of the best advice, expertise, facts that you can. Jeff did that incredibly well. He was also an unbelievable talent sponsor, so not only mentoring talent, but giving folks the opportunity to round out their careers. And I benefited from that at McKesson. I was there for 13 years. I started as the head of M&A finance. I later led our corporate finance and FP&A organization. I then went on to lead our investor relations team. for about 3.5 years. And my final job there was the chief accounting officer. So that really reflects a real investment in developing people and having, I benefited from rotating through a number of critical roles. And that wouldn't have been possible without a CFO who was really committed to that talent development. And I try to carry that with me today. And then the third area was just an incredible public speaker. In my time working for Jeff, when I was in the head of FP&A, my job was to put together a lot of his presentation material. So I got that very intimate seat to how does a speaker consider, what do they want to say? What do they want to get across? What message? And how do you really, he had a wonderful gift of really thinking about it from the audience perspective. Who is my audience? What's going to matter? How will my message land the best with this particular audience? And that was really a gift to me. And I used those skills and some of what I learned every day. So that was McKesson, great experience. Another CFO that came in after Jeff left was a guy by the name of James Beer, another wonderful mentor, taught me a lot about resilience, tenacity, and also supported my career. When he moved on to become the CFO at Atlassian, he brought me with him, right? So here's the connection between great mentors, how your career path develops, because I think it's wonderful to, work with people that you respect and admire. So I followed him to Atlassian. That company had just gone public about a year before we both arrived. So that was really about how do you take a company that at the time was growing 40-50% annually and really help build the scale and capability. And I also got to work with a great mentor. So I'm lucky in some of those regards. I'm going to pause there because I could also go on. But those are some of the formative experiences and definitely formative mentors in my career.
No, that's fantastic. What I like about what you said, Erin, is you talked about the mentors and things that you learned from them. And it was all what, some people call soft skills, is Jeff's ability to communicate and evaluate and nurture talent and things like that. You didn't say nobody made you better at finance and accounting. And, I think soft skills is the wrong word, at least for us financial types, because they're actually kind of hard, at least for me. And, but it's really what sets the great leaders up. And I do tell people who aspire to become CFOs, it's not good enough to be really, really, really good at finance and accounting, because so many people are. It's the leadership skills, the ability to communicate, the ability to build teams. And it sounds like you were blessed by the mentors you had.
I was incredibly blessed, and I couldn't agree with more with the advice that you give to people that seek that out from you in terms of some of those softer skills. I agree with you. I wish there was a little bit better term for it because it can be overused. But yeah, it's that leadership, it's that ability to connect, communicate things, simply, clearly in a way that's going to land and make an impact. I think it's so important.
So, no, that's great. So you've had some great experiences, and then Lyft came along, which is, fairly dissimilar from the companies you worked for, probably in any way I could think about it. But so tell us a little bit how the opportunity come about and, what made you say, I'm going to jump on this, because if I'm not mistaken, this was your first CFO job.
This is my first CFO job, and it's just been such a great ride. I know we're going to probably talk about that a little bit more, but when the opportunity came to me, it came to me through a relationship that I had developed probably over 15 plus years with someone who is a fairly prominent executive recruiter. And she knew the opportunity at Lyft and obviously knew me. And so when she called and said, you have to meet these people and look at this, I knew it was something to pause and take a look at. I was a Lyft rider. I used the product. I had a strong affinity for the brand. Oftentimes, people, they have this affinity with the Lyft brand. It's like, oh, Lyft, they say it sort of like that. And I did as well. Frankly, at the time, Lyft was having a very difficult time as a company. Just coming through the period where it was coming out of COVID, which really was a very difficult time, as you can imagine, for a company that's business is about getting people out and about in the world. A very difficult time for the company, had made some very painful cost-cutting choices, and was really needing to get to a path to recovery, right? That was sort of the mission at the time. So, I came into it thinking, this is a great brand. I understand it. I'm a user. Interestingly, my time at McKesson, so McKesson operated, not a consumer brand, certainly, but operated in an industry structure where there were sort of three large global players, right? So I understood how there could be scaled global players who could all be innovative and financially successful. And I really thought that was misunderstood at the time about the ride-sharing industry. I think there was a little bit more of a traditional, sort of network effect mindset where it was winner take all. And I saw it quite differently. And so I had a belief in the product and the industry, and I knew that this could be, this company could be successful and financially successful. And then, of course, it was meeting and spending time with David Risher, who was a new CEO at the time, very newly appointed in the job, and just making sure that I saw the connection, the values, the connection based on principle, how we would work together. So it was a combination of those three things that really sealed the deal at the time that the opportunity was presented to me.
No, that's fantastic. It's interesting. Like, I hadn't thought of it, but like during COVID, there was an awful lot of attention about, the airline industry and the hotel industry, and would they survive? But I never just hadn't thought of it. Just the rideshare industry was certainly impacted too. And those companies, you're perhaps not as well capitalized as, say, Delta Airline or someone like that, right? So
right, yeah, no, that's right. I mean, when I came in, the company was not generating a profit, was still sort of burning cash on a quarterly basis. It was a very difficult time in this company's history.
Yeah. Well, the financial performance, since you've joined has, been remarkable. A lot of financial milestones that, frankly, a few years ago, maybe people were skeptical that Lyft could achieve, but they've done that. But so you're the CFO of a pretty visible public company. What are some things that, you're thinking about in that capacity about, okay, hey, we're profitable on a GAAP basis now. We're running cash flow positive for the first time in our history. So what are some of the challenges that you face? And it is unique, even, it's not the biggest company in the world, but it's a highly visible one.
It is.
So what are the challenges that you face in your role as a CFO?
Yeah, thank you for articulating some of those financial milestones. It's a beautiful thing about being on this podcast because we can geek out over how amazing it is to move from a place where we were losing money on a quarterly basis to achieving GAAP profitability. We're now generating over $1 billion in free cash flow for the trailing 12 months. These are very significant milestones for the organization. And so it sort of leads into the answer to your question. I really feel that Lyft now, 2.5 years later, we're at a very different inflection point, right? The inflection point 2.5 years ago was focus on the operation, get the organization refocused after a different, very difficult period of time, become operationally excellent again, deliver a fantastic service to our drivers and riders, build the business, start to launch new products. That was really the core of the mission. And now we sit here today having had a few cycles, very successful cycles of getting the business on a much, much better footing, beginning to turn this profitability and cash generating corner. And at the same time, we're in a growth industry, right? Our industry continues to grow. So we now have the opportunity to say, how do we invest against that growth? And you've seen us start to do that. We made an acquisition into Europe. We just made a smaller tuck-in acquisition kind of on the luxury end of our portfolio. And so now it's how do we take the company to this next inflection point where we're investing in our growth opportunities. And at the same time, our industry is, the technology in our industry is also evolving with the advent of autonomous vehicles. It's quite small today, but it absolutely has the capacity to be a multiplier in accelerating what's already pretty strong growth. And so it's taking that financial success and ensuring that we're making very smart, very wise, very calculated decisions about how we take that strategy forward as an organization. But what a luxury to be here versus where we were 2.5 years ago. It's pretty exciting, not only for me, but for I think everyone at Lyft.
Oh yeah, it has to be. It's something about autonomous vehicles because they haven't made an impact in Boston where I'm from yet,
Yes.
and especially in suburban Boston. But I was down in Austin not so long ago, and they're everywhere. And I tell you, the first couple of times I saw them, it threw me off my game a little bit. I'm like, what the heck is that? So,
Yeah. Did you take a ride, Jack?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't do it intentionally. I believe that on your app you can human or autonomous, and I don't know. I was curious, so I did. But yeah, it was a pretty interesting experience. But
Yeah.
I don't know, as you know about me from before this, I talk a lot, so I do like having a human drive me whenever possible. So.
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting, like I mentioned, so autonomous vehicles are very present in just a few cities in the US, Austin being one, but also obviously here in San Francisco, in LA, you're going to see a good amount in Phoenix. And those cars that have been on the ground, in particular San Francisco, LA, and Phoenix now for a number of years, we see it in the data. It brings in additional riders into the marketplace. And those riders don't just take autonomous rides, they're continuing to use rideshare for more and more aspects of their life. We very much see a future. Don't worry, your driver's not going away. We very much see that the future will be a mix of autonomous vehicles and driver-driven vehicles. Our business goes through so many peaks and troughs in a given day, right? You can imagine the ride demand during commute hours, and then the middle of the workday or the middle of the night. There's certainly peaks and troughs there. So the hybrid network is the way that's going to serve that most efficiently. But people do want drivers, right? You want that driver there for maybe the extra service or to help you get your bag out at an airport. And then you think about use cases for autonomous, how that will expand the way people think about using rideshare. Yeah, it's exciting. It's still early days. We've got a couple of important partnerships we announced. We're going to be with Waymo coming up in Nashville here in 2026.
Okay.
With Baidu over in Europe, we've announced some plans there. So it's exciting.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. And, to me, it's, in 2015, I couldn't have imagined the way things are today. And I'm just so excited for how things are going to be 10 years from now.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, forgive me for this question, but I am actually legally required to ask you this as a podcast host who interviews CFOs. But I'd love to talk a little about AI and, what Lyft's approach to AI is both in the product level and then internally. And, it is of interest to me, Lyft's approach to it, because you have almost like the ultimate data privacy concerns, right? I mean, I don't know, whatever number, 50 million credit cards on file, right? And driver habits and things like that. So you need to take it very, very seriously. And I'm curious what your approach to it is.
Yeah, our approach is pretty clear and pretty simple. It's the same if we think about it from the customer lens or the internal lens. How does AI help the human do what they do better and more efficiently? So if you think about some of the things that we've done on the product side, for example, driver AI assist, right? So we know that you drive certain days, certain times. We say, what's your goal this week, Jack, to earn? If you started we notice you drive on Thursdays. If you sort of expanded by an hour on the front end, there's a lot of rides during that time. So it's really about the AI helping the human to achieve their goal and to do better. Same thing, we're using it a lot as many companies are, on the customer care side to great results in terms of resolution time of issues, 80+% faster. So that piece has just been incredible. And then internally, it's very much the same. How are we leveraging various AI tools, again, to help our people? Classic, I think as a CFO, former CFO, you'll relate to this, sort of reduce the more of the manual time of the job and increase the human thinking and analytical piece of the job. And so that's how we're deploying it, both customer facing and internally.
No, that makes a whole lot of sense. And it's an amazing future. But, for the most part, CFOs have been a little bit behind other members of the C-suite. And, partly it's because we're cautious by nature. But it's also just pragmatic because you're dealing with the most confidential, private, sensitive things that I'm not mocking marketing people, but it's not always the worst thing in the world if marketing plans get out a little bit early. Sometimes they like that when that happens, right? It can create a little
Yeah.
bit of buzz. But yeah, you're dealing as a CFO, you're dealing with the most sensitive data of anybody in the company, and you need to be prudent in adopting any technology.
Absolutely. And it's part of as a CFO working with your head of IT, right? Making sure that we've got the right infrastructure, because to the extent that we are utilizing some of the AI, it's contained within our walls, and so we're minimizing that risk overall. But yes, you have to be cognizant, I think, as a CFO, of that risk and the way that you are using it and it's available within your organization.
No, absolutely. And a few minutes ago, you mentioned one of the reasons you joined was the CEO, David Risher.
Yeah.
And I always, in the member organization, the most common question I get asked is, how do you build a productive partnership with the CEO? And it's one of those things CFOs have been saying for years, that the most important relationship they have in their professional lives is with the CEO. But it's only recently that CEOs have reciprocated that. They've often said it's the head of engineering, head of sales, whatever it might be. But now more and more of them are agreeing with CFOs that, yes, this is the critical relationship. And I know David actually, I don't even know if you know this, but he publicly referred to you, as you probably do, as the best hire he ever made. And he's made a lot of them. So clearly you figured it out. But what is your secret to developing such a strong relationship with the CEO?
Yeah, wonderful question. I think it really, for me, started from the very beginning. As I mentioned, when you asked me about sort of what was it that made me want to join Lyft, going back to our discussion about mentors, one of my most important mentors, that I mentioned, James Beer, said the same thing to me. The most important the most important factor that you want to consider is that relationship with the CEO, because it's everything for a CFO. It's extremely important. And so I went into some of my initial set of meetings with that in mind, just, understanding how David thought, what was important to him, how he made decisions. And it was incredibly clear right from the outset that this was a person that was very principles-based, logic-based, had a deep set of ingrained values about what he was trying to achieve, and importantly, how he wanted to achieve that, and how he saw me as a partner in achieving those goals as an organization. And so getting that early, I think, alignment and being able to have those very open and frank conversations, which can be vulnerable, because as a CFO and a CEO, you're each going to bring unique strengths and sets of experiences. So how do you understand how that can be complementary? How do you understand how the two of you working together can really magnify the impact at an executive level and help drive the organization forward? So those are some of I don't know if those are secrets, but I think about them as fairly straightforward ways that I think you try to get that relationship and alignment established very early. And then you reinforce that along the way with, the consistency of your behavior, and always coming back to the foundation of values and principles.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's not like a secret, but I've made it this far without a sports metaphor. Lucky me. But people always said you can watch Michael Jordan or other great athletes and they make it look easy. It's really not easy. It's just they've made the commitment to master their craft, right? I'm pretty sure I can't do most of the things Michael Jordan could do on a basketball court. And it's probably similar to you. You might think it's commonsensical, but in fact it's a pain point for a lot of CFOs, right? And the fact that you've had this, wonderful relationship, and, and a lot of the work, it sounds like maybe was even done during the interview process. Hey, this is the person that I want to build something great with over the next few years.
It is. And then of course you build upon that, right? You're always building upon that and getting to know each other, taking those learnings going forward, understanding, when it makes sense to have the hard conversations, and how do you navigate through those? All of those experiences build upon themselves.
Absolutely. Okay. The next couple of questions you may not have been prepped for. So they were questions I was curious about Lyft. I was reading the news this morning. If any of them are out of left field, we'll cut this part of the conversation out. But I don't think they're going to be. But, one thing that was curious is, the company certainly, it's a very different company than the one you joined 3 years ago. And so I'm thinking as CFO, you've got an MBA, so you don't rely necessarily on the traditional GAAP metrics to measure business performance, although you certainly do use those as well. But, how do you define the financial metrics that matter most? And because you mentioned the importance of communication, how do you, communicate those priorities to the C-suite and the rest of the company?
Yeah, this is a critical area, and certainly an area that when I came in, we made some slight adjustments to, right? So we focus on a few things. We focus on our active riders number, right? How many active riders do we have on the platform on a quarterly and annual basis? What are all of the ways that we are growing that? That's one. Number two is we talk a lot about frequency. The frequency with which riders take rides tells us a lot about the quality of the service and the competitiveness of the service that we facilitate across our marketplace. And those two things are the direct inputs to our bookings number, which gives a sense of the scale of the platform. So at the top line, that's how we're focusing the organization. Everything we do, whether it's, from an operational excellence or product innovation or partnership perspective, is in service of how do we expand those metrics. And then, of course, as a CFO, I'm going to say profitability, right? So being able to grow the top line and expand your margins is essential for any successful business. So how do we, focus on providing that quality of service and expanding the top line, but doing it in a very disciplined, very efficient way? And we, the sub-metrics under that are vast, but again, all roads lead to that. And then we've been focused, obviously, given some of the history and where we've come as a company, on the health of our cash flow generation. Because obviously we're in a growth business, investing in our growth is critical, but also, very, very focused on returning to shareholders. So those are the critical metrics that we focus on as an organization as we do all of our planning, our product planning. Those are, North Stars, and sort of how I continue to communicate to the organization how every piece of work that we do leads to improving those metrics.
It makes sense. And, I'm curious because you're in, a competitive market.
Yes.
And, all of those, strategic initiatives that you talked about, and even things like, pricing models, just general product innovation. I don't know specifically, but I'm assuming sustainability is critical to Lyft for a number of reasons. So you're in this competitive space, you're a public company, and you're expected to meet, investor demands as such. How do you balance that? Because it can't be easy.
Yeah, it can't be easy, and I'm gonna kind of go back to my simplistic answer, and this is very reflective of the way that I think I was trained throughout my career, in finance and by my mentors. It's critical to have robust integrated planning processes, and what I mean by that is not only very tight visibility into the quarter you're in or maybe the next quarter out, but zooming back out, what are you really trying to achieve over an annual cycle? And how are you monitoring that? How are you resourcing that? And then zooming even further out and making sure you have a multi-year point of view and making sure that you are refreshing all of those on a regular basis. Because certainly in this industry, in many industries, things do not stand still, competitively, or whatever the case may be. So I think it starts from that sort of foundation. And then it's about, communicating both within the company, focusing our team members, but also externally, saying what we're going to do, right? Saying what we're going to do and then doing that repeatedly, giving insight into the critical foundational driving assumptions, because you're always making assumptions about how things will transpire. So being transparent, saying what you intend to do, and then, getting the organization, focused and working like the devil to get it done and delivering.
No, that's great. So, and I want to chat a little about shifting gears a little bit, but, a big challenge for executives today, because we live in a very busy world, is work-life balance.
Yes.
And I'm curious, do you have any advice on how people can achieve that elusive goal of having work-life balance? Or you're laughing, so maybe it's unachievable. So,
well, having been a fan of your podcast, I've heard you ask this question, a number of times. So obviously gave it some thought, knowing that we'd be discussing today. I am often approached in my company and have been throughout my career, in particular by women, because I think they see me, as a senior woman, someone, but also can relate to in terms of other responsibilities that are going on in life. And so I'll sort of share with you what I share with them, which is the absolute honest answer. It's difficult. And I'm not sure that I have actually truly met anyone in my career who's got the answer. It's difficult, and I think you have to accept that, especially as you get into more and more senior roles. But a few of the things that I work really hard to do is getting the help around me that I need. So asking for that help, putting, reliable help in place, clearly here at work, but also personally as it relates to areas of assistance with my kids or the household, et cetera. So asking for help, I think, is really critical. And then the one habit that I have done very consistently for many, many years is I spend a little bit of time each week and I think about what are the one or two things that are the most important that I can get done this week professionally, this week, this month, this quarter, and this year. And the list gets smaller and smaller the further that you zoom out. And I look at that regularly and I try to make sure that that's how I'm spending my time, right? So it's a little bit of a quick mini self-audit for what's important. And then does my calendar really reflect that? And I never get it right, but I think that practice is extremely helpful to helping me to adjust and make sure that my focus is where it needs to be. And then the last thing I'll say, Jack, is that, I try really hard never to miss those important moments in my kids' lives. It's and it means making sacrifices and making trade-offs, and I'm not able to be there for everything, but I do think showing up matters, and so I make that a priority.
No, that's fantastic. That might be the best answer we've gotten so far. And it's interesting. You mentioned that, like, you advise the women a lot that too. But I'll say, when I do ask guys that question, a lot of them afterwards they say, no one has ever asked me that in my career, how I achieve it. But it's important for everybody really that wants to have a well-rounded life, and there's just a lot of proof that people that do nothing but work for their life, it's really good in the short term and for some people in the medium term, but you're not going to be a good long-term player if you don't have these outside interests. So
yeah, totally. I totally agree.
Indeed. So anyway, I want to ask, the role of the CFO in financial leadership generally is changing. In my first CFO role, it was, the best accountants often became CFOs. It was backwards looking. It was reporting history. In fact, the tagline to this podcast is CFOs no longer record history, they make history. But how do you see it continuing to evolve in the next few years?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's such a great question. I have the great good fortune of having been growing up in organizations where finance was an essential business partner to the business, right? We had a seat at the table. Didn't find out about things afterward or, come in to fix it after it happened. It was really an essential business partner to making high quality decisions about leading an organization forward. And so that is the mindset that I bring into this job. And I think, great CFOs do that. They are, of course, have expertise across the disciplines, as I've had the great good fortune to have expertise across a number of finance disciplines, but they also bring a business mindset. And I think that's essential in any leadership team. The CFO is playing that very active role in executing on a strategy, understanding, the different paths and options, and is a vital contributor to that. And so I think that's important today and increasingly important as we think about what's ahead.
That's great. You actually sort of stepped on my next question a little bit, but
Sorry.
I always like to, no, I'm only kidding. But I always like to ask, what's your advice for the next generation of CFOs? And I'm thinking maybe people who are in their first year of their CFO role, or even people who, they're 6 months to 3 years from getting that first ever CFO role. Any advice you can share with them?
My advice again tends to be sort of grounded sometimes in the simplicity. It's, sort of raise your hands for those, hard but incredibly important assignments. Make sure you're surrounding yourself with sort of the best teams and the best expertise. Know the areas that are either not your favorite or maybe not, what you're exceptional at, and make sure you're surrounding yourself with people who are exceptional at those areas. and building those relationships and just being known, known as someone who truly is a team player. I know that gets way overused, but I'm a huge believer in the strength of teams. And it doesn't need to be the team that reports to you. It could be the team that comes together on any particular project, because I think that's the way that you build support as a leader. One of the important ways that you build support as a leader. Those are some of my pieces of advice.
I think that's great. This has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this conversation, Erin, and I'm sure that the listeners will as well. And more importantly, they'll get a lot of great wisdom from you. And I'd just like to give you the final word.
So, Jack, I just want to thank you for creating this little community. I think it's pretty special and pretty unique. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you for being a Lyft rider. That's fantastic. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this incredible comeback story of Lyft.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy, and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.